everyone, welcome back to Grains in Small Places. And since peach season is in full swing, I figured why not try to make something with peaches. So today we're going to be making some peaches and cream bread. I know that sounds kind of different, but we're going to try it out today for the first time together. So let's get started. Okay, so the first things first, let's go ahead and mill our flour. Today I'm going to go ahead and use some hard white wheat and spelt. I like that combination together. I think it makes for a really nice soft bread. If you have hard red, you could use that in place of hard white. You could use all hard white or hard red. The little different combinations is always kind of fun. I like to weigh out my wheat berries. I will put a link to the recipe in the description box below, and it gives you the weight in grams. It also gives you the volume of flour and the volume of wheat berries. So depending on which way you prefer to bake, these recipes should work out for all kinds of bakers. But I like to weigh my wheat berries first. That way when I mill my flour, I know I have exactly the right amount of flour. That was the hard white wheat. Now I'm going to add just a little bit of spelt to the top of that, and I'm just going to mill them right together. And you can see I zeroed out my scale in between so I could measure the grams of each berry separately without having to try to do any math. I'm going to mill these on fine, so what I do is turn my mill on, tighten my stones a little, pour the wheat berries in the hopper up here, and then I will just tighten it just a slight bit more to get me that fine flour. These little containers that I use to keep my grain in are super handy and helpful to keep on my counter for like my everyday grain bins. I will link those below if you're interested in taking a look at them and any of the other things that I use and recommend. And it looks like our flour is just about done being milled. So I'm going to go ahead and open the stones back up and turn off my mill. Ready to go. And here is that flour. I'm going to just take that over to my counter, and I have my milk here. I have about half a cup of whole milk. You could use heavy cream to give that peaches and cream flavor. And I'm putting my 2 tablespoons of butter in the milk, and then I just quickly microwave that to start to soften it. And as you can see, the butter is not soft all the way here, so I'm going to stick it back in the microwave again just for like 30 seconds and make sure that that butter is melted all the way. I don't want this boiling or anything like that. I just want the butter mostly melted in the milk. In the recipe, I'm going to make sure I have the right thing written out, but you'll see here in a little bit that I did make a little bit of a mistake, but never fear, I was able to fix it nice and quick because I realized what went wrong. So I'm going to put 1 egg and then 3 tablespoons of sugar. You could use honey here, and if you want this bread to be a really sweet dessert bread, you could even increase the amount of sugar. But I wanted to just kind of have just the essence of sweetness, not something that's overly sweet. So to balance out that sweetness, we'll put 1.5 teaspoons of salt. And I really love using this Ceylon cinnamon. This is the cinnamon that has all of the antioxidants and the health benefits. So I'm going to put 1/2 teaspoon of ground cinnamon. Rewind that. I know what you're thinking. Cinnamon. We don't normally put cinnamon in our bread dough because it inhibits the rising of our yeast. But because we're only putting in just a small amount, it's not like we're making cinnamon swirl bread or anything where we're using 2 tablespoons of cinnamon at a time. This is just 1/2 teaspoon, just a little bit of cinnamon. So since it's such a small amount, we should be good to go. So I really love to use fresh nutmeg. I'm going to just use one of these little fresh nutmegs. I ordered a whole pack of them on Amazon for a minimal amount of money, and it's probably going to be a year's supply for me because I use such a little amount. But I just grate it right into here. It's probably about 1/4 teaspoon or so. Not a whole lot. We obviously don't want it to taste medicinal or perfumey like nutmeg can if it's overpowering. But that little hint of it, I think, really makes a nice difference. I'm just going to mix this a little bit with the mixer and just make sure everything is incorporated before I add my flour to the mixture. I'm going to go ahead and dump in my flour here. You may want to reserve just a little bit if this is the first time ever making this recipe. I do like my dough a little bit on the wet side. Some people don't like to work with dough that wet. You can always mill just a little bit of extra flour if you need to adjust the flour amount. Because of the fact that we all live in different climates and we all buy different wheat berries that have different hydration amounts, we all measure a little bit differently, unless of course we're measuring by weight, because the grams is a grams is a gram no matter who is measuring it. But as far as scooping the flour or spooning in the flour or leveling off the flour, we all do it just a little bit differently, and the humidity outside affects bread dough recipes, really any recipes, so it has a lot to do with it. But while I'm mixing this, I'm noticing it is extremely dry, way too dry. And then I realized, oh, I forgot to put the water in. So we're going to use about 2/3 cup of warm water, and I went ahead and mixed that in. And for me, it's still on the dry side, but I know that I'm going to be putting in some peaches. And I know the peaches are going to have a lot of moisture in them. So we're just going to go with this for now and see how it goes. I'm going to go ahead and start mixing this together now. And then we're going to go ahead and cover this and let it sit for about 15 minutes or even up to 2 hours. Now, I have not put my yeast in yet. I like to do the method. I always teach the method of not putting the yeast in until after flour has had a chance to absorb the liquids. This way we don't mess up our rise times. This way our flour can absorb the liquid and start helping us out with that gluten formation before we've added any yeast or any of the kneading process. So we just wanted to make sure that there was no dry flour showing. And here you can see I'm using a fresh peach. I went ahead and took the peels off because I thought the texture in there might be strange. And I probably could have used another peach in here. I recommend 1 cup of basically diced peaches or cut up peaches. If you want to use frozen peaches, that's fine. Just make sure they're thawed all the way and then cut them up into the small size pieces. If you want to use canned peaches, that's fine as well. Just go ahead and make sure you drain out the juice. Otherwise, that will affect our liquid ratio. So I'm just going to peel these and then chop them up into small pieces, probably like a 1/2 inch size or so. I had some puppy dogs, cute little eyeballs looking at me while I was peeling these. They love their fruits and veggies, so I went ahead and let them snack on the peels. So I'm just going to dice these up pretty small while I'm waiting for my dough to start absorbing that liquid during that 15-minute rest period. Again, that could go on for 2 hours if you forget about it, if life happens and if stuff is going on, you need to do the laundry or tend to your children or anything like that. It doesn't have to be exactly 15 minutes. But oftentimes I will ask my Alexa to set a timer for me so that I know when about I need to get on to the next step of my bread. And that's kind of how I keep myself organized. I kind of rely on her timers, so sometimes she doesn't listen to me very well. I will sometimes have to tell her to turn off the timer multiple times and she just keeps going over top of me, but you know, that's a story for another day. So once I have about a cup of these sliced up peaches, I'm just going to put them in a measuring cup here and let them sit for a little bit while I'm finishing off my waiting time. So now it's been about 15 minutes. If you want the kneading time to be shorter, the longer you let this sit, it tends to shorten your kneading time. So the 15 minutes, I'm still usually kneading for 20-25 minutes after this. If I let it sit longer, I do notice that it needs a lot less time, if that makes sense. So I'm just going to spoon the peaches right into the dough here. I was a little bit concerned that it may affect the gluten formation in doing this, but in all honesty, this bread turned out so light and fluffy. It was just amazing. The texture was just amazing. I'm just mixing this in slowly with the peaches, and once the peaches are a little bit incorporated, then we can add our yeast. So I'm guessing the yeast really loved the sugars of the fresh fruit, and that's one of the reasons why this was so light and fluffy. But the main reason is that we kneaded it long enough to the window pane stage, which I'll show you here in a little bit what that looks like. And also we didn't put too much flour in, so a dry dough will make for a heavier loaf. It also will make it next to impossible to obtain that stretchy window pane. Now that this is all mixed in, we're going to go ahead and add our 2 teaspoons of, I like to use instant yeast. If you use active dry yeast, you can go ahead and proof this yeast during that 15-minute wait period. You can put the yeast in, reserve some of the water from the recipe, and go ahead and proof it like that. And then you would put it in at this stage. I'm going to kind of bring you in closer to speed show you this kneading, because obviously I don't think you want to watch me knead dough for 25 minutes. I'm going to try and bring you in a little bit closer so you can see what it looks like. Alexa, set a timer for 5 minutes. Here we're at about 5 minutes of kneading. You can see it still kind of looks like a wet, gloopy mess. So we're just going to keep going. Okay, we are at about 25 minutes of kneading, and you can see how it's starting to clear the edges of the bowl, and it's become one lump sum. It's become less gloopy, and it's come together much better. So I'm going to go ahead and check for the window pane test, and then we will go ahead and let it rise as long as it passes. Very stretchy. I'm going to get my fingers wet. And that helps to pull this off the dough hook without making too much of a mess, because this is a wetter dough. As you guys know by now, I like a wetter dough, but you can see how stretchy this is. This doesn't break apart when I take a big chunk of it, and it's nice and stretchy. So I'm happy with this. I'm going to go ahead and spray my bowl so it doesn't stick. Whoops. Just sprayed the side of my mixer. Don't do that. And then I'm just going to use the same piece of cling film that we used earlier. And we're going to let that sit and rise for about an hour, and then we'll be back. Alexa, set a timer for 1 hour. So I think I'm going to go ahead and try to shape this on my little countertop here next to my sink, because my table is otherwise spoken for. Let me show you. So my table is being used for my daily business of making dog and cat collars. While I am working on letting dough knead, letting dough rise, whatever I need to do at the same time, so I can try to multitask and bust multiple things out at once. Well, I'm guessing you could hear all of the raindrops on the roof of my RV. So we're going to go ahead and switch back over to some voiceover here so I can explain what's going on. My dough has now risen for an hour, hour and a half, somewhere in between there. I'm using a little bit of avocado oil here. You could use olive oil, but I prefer to use oil instead of flour on my work surface for my bread dough. I don't really want to incorporate any extra flour to make my dough drier than it needs to be. So I really like to use oil. I'm just going to get a little oil on my dough scraper here and get this out of the bowl. And then what we're going to do is just cut it in half. Obviously, if you want it to be precise, you could weigh each half and make sure that they're exactly the same weight, but I usually just eyeball it, and if I have one loaf that's slightly larger than the other, that's fine. But as you can see here, there's no pieces of peaches. The peaches have become one with the dough, so the essence of peach is just all throughout the dough and all incorporated in. So I guess you would call this my pre-shaping. I'm just bringing all of the edges into the center and then flipping it over so I have a little bit of surface tension and it's not just like a pile of mush. So I cut this in half. I'm going to work with the first batch. This is a little bit of a sticky dough because of the peaches in there and the sugar. So if you need a little bit more oil on your hands, that's fine. You can add some more. I'm just going to flatten this out and get most of the air bubbles out, and then we're just going to shape it into a bread loaf shape. I like to use parchment paper in my bread tins. That's just something I like to do to make it a little easier to release. But we're going to just fold this in and kind of make a triangle with the top and then roll it down. And as we roll it down, we're going to pull it a little away from us so it gets a little bit of surface tension. Then I want to make sure that I tuck those ends underneath. You can see what I'm doing with my hands here. If I need to oil my hands, if it's sticking too much, that's fine. If we just threw our dough right in the pan, it probably would have some issues with the rise and the baking. It just wouldn't give us that nice loaf look that we're looking for. but you can see that I want to push the loaf one way and push the loaf the other way, and this helps create that tension that we want. So now I'm going to just do the same thing with the second piece of dough. If you need to add more oil here, you can. And just push all the air bubbles out. And if you see any air bubbles that are real big or puffing out, you can just pop those with your finger. That's actually kind of the fun part. I really like doing that part. We'll make that little triangle at the top, and then we're going to roll it and push it away, roll it and push it away. We don't want to push it away so far that we're creating so much tension that it might rip it. Just a light, gentle tug. And then we'll just kind of push it from one side to the other. I found a little air bubble there, and I pushed that one out with my finger also. Otherwise, we have those little funny bubbles that I've posted little short videos about before. Sometimes I leave them just for fun. Maybe for Halloween bread, right? There's another one. That one didn't want to come out. All right, we got that. Okay, so we're just going to tighten that up, put it in our loaf pan. I'm going to use that same piece of cling film that I've been using this whole time and place that over top of the two loaves here. And we're going to let these rise to about double or so. It usually takes about 30 to 45 minutes. Towards the end of this last rise, we want to make sure that we preheat our oven. I like to bake it at 400 degrees Fahrenheit. And I generally bake it for 25 to 30 minutes, but we can test the internal temperature of our bread, and we want to make sure it's at least 190 degrees Fahrenheit. That's how we know our bread is done. So let's let this rest, and then we'll pop it in the oven. But you can see I pressed here, and the dough was not ready yet. It popped right back up. Now I let it rest for another 10 minutes. I press it. You can see my finger indent stayed down. And these are ready to bake. I'm just going to spritz these with just a little bit of water to help with that rise in the oven so we don't get as much cracking on the sides. Just giving it just a little bit of mist, and then we'll pop it in the oven. Usually 25 to 30 minutes or so. Everybody's oven is a little different. And now they're done. And we want to take them out of the bread pans fairly quickly so they don't start to cool in the pan, which causes condensation all around the bread. It can actually cause our bread to stale quicker as well. So we'll pull these out. They were sticking a little bit to the edges that I didn't put parchment paper on. So we pulled them out, just stuck them on a wire rack, pulled the parchment paper out from underneath. I like using the parchment paper as handles, and let these cool on the wire rack for about an hour or so before we slice into them. If we slice into them too soon, then they may end up with a gummy texture on the inside. Look how beautiful and brown they turned out, and this is without any butter on top or an egg wash or anything like that. Okay, now my bread has cooled. We're going to go ahead and slice it so you can see the inside and the texture of the bread. And this turned out so wonderful. It was sweet enough to be so delicious with just bread and butter. It was also not too sweet that we couldn't use it as sandwich bread. So this was a great multi-purpose bread. I'm so excited to add this one onto our list. This is my second loaf. I hardly have any of the first loaf left already. Guys, this is really good. It tastes like the essence, I guess, of a peach pie. It's not super overpowering with the peach flavor, but it's definitely there. Of course, if you want to increase the peach flavor, you could always add more peach into that and just decrease your water just a little bit. And I also recommend trying it toasted. Thanks for hanging out with me today, everyone. I'm glad we got to make a new bread recipe. I was really craving making a new bread video. It's been a while since I've done bread, and you all know I kind of have a passion for that. So I hope you too enjoy new flavors and don't be afraid to experiment with different things in your bread. Whatever's in season or whatever you can find locally is always great to try it out. I'll make sure to put a link to this recipe in the description box below. That way you can check it out on my blog at grainsandsmallplaces.net. And thank you for stopping by, Grains and Small Places. Goodbye. So, Cannoli, I'm trying to record. All these sounds.